almost made a Chewbacca noise earlier, and I'm so sad because I'll never be able to do that again.
Aww.
It happened by accident. I just gave a big sigh, and then
Welcome, feathered friends and bird nerds, to Raptor Radio, the podcast soaring high above the rest. Get ready to sink your talons into all things American Eagle Foundation and all things Raptor. From majestic eagles to charismatic corvids, we'll be providing you with updates from our roost while educating about the wide, wild world of raptors. The sky's the limit for our host's passion for magnificent birds of prey. Leading us in this endeavor are your hosts, Dr. Robyn Miller and Crystal Slusher.
we're back. Welcome, erudite eagles, for another episode of Raptor Radio. We have got a very enriching episode ahead for you. So we've got Crystal Slusher in the house.
Hello.
And today we are joined by Avian Care Specialist Extraordinaire John Simcox. It was very hard not calling you Jams, which is your initials that we use here.
Hey, it's okay. Jams is what most people can call me because it's easier to remember half the time. So it's totally fine.
So, John, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you're here today, that would be awesome.
Yeah, of course. I'm John. So I'm an avian care specialist as well as the internship coordinator here at American Eagle Foundation. So I'm here to discuss enrichment and all things enrichment. I actually am one of the representatives for American Eagle Foundation on IAATE's enrichment committee. So I've been doing a lot in terms of in the world of enrichment for the committee, writing articles for the newsletter that goes out every quarter for IAATE, and doing some fun things like that. So I'm here to be able to talk to you guys about enrichment.
And what do you mean by enrichment, John?
Yeah, so enrichment is kind of a broad term, but it's mainly it's an opportunity to be able to provide our birds with some sort of stimulus or even an opportunity for choice to be able to give our birds something that will increase their overall welfare or quality of life. So enrichment can be a variety of different things. It's not just one thing, or it's not just something that's tactile that the animal can hold on to or experience, but it's really a broad, all-encompassing term that we use to make sure that we're stimulating our birds' bodies and minds at the same time.
So we have an enrichment program for our birds here in the American Eagle Foundation, which is why we asked you to join us today on the show, because we want to talk a little bit about what our enrichment program looks like and hopefully give our listeners a sense of how enrichment plays a crucial role in promoting our raptors' welfare. In your experience, how does enrichment impact the mental and physical health of our resident raptors?
Yeah, I think it's first important that we understand a couple of different terms as well. So I think we first have to start off with the terms of well-being, welfare, and quality of life, and understanding that they all kind of sound the same. And sometimes I've even gotten myself confused on what these terms mean. But I think by better understanding them, we can better allow ourselves the opportunity to enrich our birds at a higher level, right?
Yeah.
So well-being is really the overall health or positive interactions that a bird has in a short time period. So we could say that, for example, by giving a bird a shot, right? We decrease its well-being for a short period of time, but overall they're going to respond better and it's going to increase. Whereas welfare actually refers to the long-term period of a bird's health or positive interactions. So, and then quality of life is basically all-encompassing. It's encompassing both well-being, it's encompassing welfare, and it's looking at both the positive and negative aspects of both of those welfare and well-being. And that's how we better understand both of like welfare and well-being in the terms that we're using there. So whenever we're talking about enrichment, in reality, like it's helping their well-being, but we're really looking at welfare and we're looking at their quality of life, because those are the long-term aspects that we're going to see from our birds. And so that's the things that we want to make sure that we're managing in terms of our enrichment program. And so through enrichment, we are able to do things that normally we're not able to do, as taking care of our animals. Historically, in being a zookeeper, being an avian care specialist, we might just focus on providing our birds with a well-balanced diet and making sure that they have exercise and making sure that their room is set up or their enclosure is set up in a way that provides them opportunities to be able to fly, in our case fly, but for other animals, move around appropriately. And that would be aiding these animals' physical well-being or physical welfare. However, enrichment really focuses more on the mental aspect of things. Because I think as we've grown in this field, we've understood that it's not just about the animal's physical well-being. So we want to make sure that we're using enrichment appropriately to stimulate their mind and allow these birds the opportunity to express species-specific behaviors, to express goal behaviors that we want to see from them. So to do a variety of things that normally might be a little bit different. Because it's really important that we understand that, here at American Eagle Foundation, all the birds we care for are non-releasable birds, right? And so there's some reason why they can't be out in the wild. And we want them to be out in the wild, but unfortunately they just can't be there, right? So it's really important for us to understand, though, that no matter how hard we try, what we provide them is not going to be the wild. Mm-hmm. And the things that they are going to experience naturally out in the wild, we're not always going to be able to recreate under human care. However, what enrichment allows us to do is it allows us to push back against those boundaries. And it allows us the opportunity to provide these birds with expression and freedom of choice in their environment and an opportunity to be a bird. And which sometimes, under human care it can be difficult for them to do due to maybe an injury or some other reason why they're here with us.
You touched on so many wonderful things, and that answer that I want to circle back to. The first thing that I want to sort of touch on is the transition within the zookeeping field that you mentioned, from being concerned strictly with physical health to transitioning more towards long-term welfare on a psychological level too. So when we know better, we do better, and enrichment is one of those ways that the American Eagle Foundation is doing better, but also the zookeeping industry as a whole is doing better.
Yeah, I still think that there is, some disadvantages. So if we look at it through research, I feel like oftentimes, and this is not just for enrichment, this is across the board for everything. We see enrichment oftentimes more specialized in mammals than we do any other type of animal species or animal taxa. And because of this means that some enrichment items aren't going to work, right? So there's one thing I've learned, though. It's not because of an animal's ability to think or process information, but it's more so about an animal's natural history than anything. However, the way that you might enrich an orangutan is not going to be the same way that you're going to enrich a bald eagle or a hawk, right? So, there is a lot more to be done in the world of enrichment and better understanding other taxa, which I believe that it's slow, but it's progressing in that way. And but like I said, there is a little bit of a disadvantage because a lot of the research that's out there or the studies that have been done on enrichment primarily involve mammals. And so I do think that as a field, though, we are moving forward in that direction of prioritizing an animal's entire scope of life, right? We're not just worried about making sure that they have good food and calling it a day. We're making sure that, not only are those physical needs, their need for food and water and exercise are being met, but we're making sure that we're exercising them mentally as well. Because there's a lot of animals out there, birds, reptiles, invertebrates, mammals, that are incredibly intelligent. And in the wild, they're going to be experiencing things throughout their lives that's going to really allow them to be able to flex those muscles in their brain, right? And so part of what enrichment does and what we can do for these birds is be able to help them along under our care. So, obviously we're not able to talk to our birds and be able to know exactly what's going on, but by observations that we can make both from wild birds as well as the birds under our care allow us to be able to provide enriching opportunities for them to be able to express some of those behaviors. So it's really important that we understand, really, like I said, that all-encompassing, or I like to call it the holistic view of caring for animals, and in our case, specifically birds. But there is a lot more to be done for enrichment. It's not, cut and dry. It's not as easy as what some people make it out to be, but it doesn't have to be hard at the same time. So I like to describe enrichment as a science that's steeped in observation. So it's not something that can just, we can just kind of throw it to the side and it's just like, oh yeah, like we'll get to it if we can. No, enrichment should really be a vital part of our day in caring for these birds. And it's not just an afterthought as well. So
speaking of observation, I know through our cameras, watching wild nests, the parents of the offspring eaglets actually do some of their own enrichment naturally. They bring in things like they'll leave a dropped feather, or they'll bring in pine cones or corn husks, and it serves as, some would say, a toy while they're in the nest to keep them occupied. And we've seen that over and over again in our nests, which is kind of cool that they do that naturally.
Yeah, a bird is going to experience enriching opportunities throughout their entire lifetime, right? Mm-hmm. Even a storm rolling through is an enriching opportunity for them, especially for a young bird that may have never experienced something like that before. Yeah. And so I think that's what we really are trying to do with enrichment is, like I said earlier, we're never going to be able to recreate the wild in terms of what the wild is. Yeah. But what we can do is try to get it as close as to what they would normally experience as possible.
Yeah, there's some clips that I've seen of young juveniles playing in sprinklers or playing with soccer ball, different things like that, which is kind of fun to see.
Yeah.
Because you wouldn't expect to see, this big bird playing in your sprinkler, but there it is, just checking it out.
Exactly. And I think that's why, I get excited talking about enrichment. Mm-hmm. And part of the reason why I think the field has moved towards making enrichment a priority, because, oftentimes we don't think about, like I said, we talk about mammals a lot. We talk about how oftentimes mammals experience play behaviors, right? But oftentimes people don't think about that birds doing that, or even reptiles, or, these animals that aren't necessarily as charismatic, right? And so birds experience those things. And even within the bird community, like it's not just parrots or corvids that experience these behaviors, but like you said, it's wild bald eagles, it's our hawks or our falcons, our vultures, for example. Like, they're incredibly curious birds, and piquing that curiosity allows them to have some sort of variance in their day and breaks up the monotony that they historically animals under human care have experienced.
We've talked a lot about how there's a lot more research for mammals and other taxa aside from raptors and birds in terms of enrichment. So what would enrichment look like for raptors?
So I think to be able to answer that question, we have to understand two other terms. So I think it's really important for us to make sure that we're identifying a bird's natural history and a bird's individual history. And so, like, what are those two things? So natural history basically is about the species, all encompassing of the species, right? So a bald eagle has their own natural history. A red-tailed hawk has their own natural history. A peregrine falcon has their own natural history. And some of those things might include, like, for example, bald eagles, they tend to mate for life. They tend to come back to the same nest every year. You know, those kinds of things is natural history. Peregrine falcon, fastest bird in the world, right? So they're very aerodynamic. They hunt exclusively on birds for the most part. So I think it's really important that we understand, like, those behaviors that we see amongst species on a species level, those things is what we consider natural history. Now, individual history is really important for us as animal caretakers and as avian care specialists, because individual history is really what's going to affect our birds on a daily basis. So some of our birds might not be able to express species-specific behaviors like migration, for example. However, because of a bird's injury or maybe the illness that they had sustained in the wild, or maybe because they're a human-imprinted bird, they have behaviors that their wild counterparts aren't going to express. And it's simply just because our birds have these unique reasons as to why they're here with us. So those smaller behaviors that we see on a daily basis that are unique to the individual itself, that's what we consider individual history. And so what we do is we basically marry those two things together, and we take a bird's natural history and the bird's individual history, and we try to provide enriching opportunities that can satisfy both requirements. So, for example, we have a bird like Sylvia. So Sylvia is a resident bald eagle that we have here at American Eagle Foundation. And unfortunately, Sylvia was blown from her nest and suffered a pretty severe wing injury. So she can no longer fly because of that. And so because of this, we're not going to want to provide her enrichment that's going to require her to fly up into the air, right? Because she can't perform that kind of behavior no longer. So that's whenever we start thinking about, okay, what are some of the natural histories of the bald eagle that allow them, that Sylvia can also express, but as a natural behavior that they would normally express in the wild? Something like ripping and shredding, right? So they're going to naturally catch prey. They've got those incredibly powerful feet. They're going to catch prey. They're going to hold on to it tight. They're going to pick at it. They're going to pull at it. They're going to rip it apart. So that's a potential enriching opportunity that we can use for Sylvia as well. But it's also understanding her individual history in that she's got a wing injury. So it's something that she can participate in both. And then we can also kind of get talking about goal-based enrichment as well with that. And there may be another question about that later. But there's a variety of different ways that we can, when we talk about how we enrich our birds at American Eagle Foundation, we can do that. However, we really want to make sure that we're focusing on staying within the natural history and the individual history of a bird, and providing them opportunities that both fit their disability or whatever reason that they're here with us, but also allow them to express behaviors that they might not be able to express, or that they would normally express in the wild, but might not be able to get to normally express under our care.
That was a ton of fantastic information. And I think it's important that we circle back to some of those ideas to help our audience digest it, because you covered so much amazing ground in that answer. So we have, of course, like natural history-based behavior that covers species-specific behaviors that they might exhibit in the wild and try to recreate that as best we can. And then we have their individual history, which may be related to the disabilities that our birds have or their mental status as an imprint. So a phrase that I hear in the training world a lot that I love, and every element of animal welfare and caretaking is a study of one. And that's where individual enrichment would come into play, where we're essentially using that science of observation to create a plan specific to the individual.
Yeah.
You also briefly touched on goals-based enrichment, and that's where I want to dig a little bit deeper with you, because it encompasses not just natural history and individual history, but it can also be behavior specific, and that it's seeking to increase or decrease certain behaviors.
Yeah.
So let's talk about goals-based enrichment.
For sure. And if we have any IAATE members out there, the enrichment committee is really focusing on talking about goal-based enrichment. So if you guys are out there and you guys want to learn more, feel free to check out the flyer articles, because that's really talking about a lot of those things. And that's one of the things that us as on the enrichment committee has a focus on really doing, is highlighting more of those goal-based opportunities.
John, before we carry on with that answer, anyone who's curious, what is IAAT?
Oh, yeah. So
Yes.
for those of you who don't know, IAATE is the International Association of Avian Trainers and Educators. So it's an organization dedicated to basically the conservation and education and professional growth of raptors and raptor trainers and educators as well. Or avian, sorry, not just raptors, avian trainers and educators. I think of raptors because I work here. But so yeah, they encompass all different kinds of birds, from parrots to raptors to anything that you can think of. So there's really some absolutely amazing people there. So the enrichment committee helps identify a few different areas of need for the IAATE as a whole. One of those being their position statements on enrichment and helping just further the idea of what enrichment is for birds. Because like we talked about before, that is kind of a lacking area for that.
I honestly could do an entire episode talking about IAATE and their tremendous impact on the avian care community and the advances that they have pioneered in terms of training philosophies, enrichment, NC2 conservation efforts. So I'm going to reel myself in and not fully geek out. I'll mention that I serve on the education committee and also the marketing committee, and I'm running again for the board this upcoming season.
Which we love, by the way.
Just as an effort to give back to an organization that's done so much for the field. One thing that I find particularly inspiring about them is that they acknowledge how much we still have yet to learn. So they cultivate a lifelong learning mindset, not just as a trainer, but a caretaker. And that's what we're modeling here with our enrichment program at AEF too.
Exactly.
And that goals-based enrichment that you were talking about.
Exactly. And I will say, to kind of add on to your point, like IAATE has also been such a huge inspiration for me. And if there's any aspiring bird keepers out there that want to learn more about this field in general, if you're in school or maybe you're still in the field, but you just haven't had that opportunity, I highly encourage you to look up IAATE. Like I said, International Association of Avian Trainers and Educators, and look into getting a membership, because they've really changed my outlook on how I train and how I educate the public as well.
You have a favorite enrichment tool that you use, with a favorite bird, or?
I think for me, my favorite kind of enrichment to provide is something where I can see the bird actively problem solving.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and I mean, even I do this, where you kind of get into a routine of providing enrichment and you're like, all right, like here it is, like whatever, but I really one of my favorite things to do is to sounds very cliche, but I really like to learn. So I feel like if I'm not learning something new, then I'm putting myself at a disadvantage, especially when it comes to caring for wildlife, because nobody ever knows everything, right? No matter how much of an expert you may be. And so I always really like, that's why I get really passionate talking about natural history and individual history, because sometimes I think we can kind of get stuck in this world of just providing an animal a toy, right? And yeah, like we talked earlier, that sometimes birds do, or animals in general do, play with things just for what we observe to be the fun of it. However, I personally, like, I try to stop myself from doing that, because we really want to make sure that we're highlighting those species specific behaviors that we were talking about, but B, because these birds are just so incredible. Like, they are so intelligent. Even take Poe the Raven out of it, right? The smartest bird that we have at our facility, or even Friar Tuck, the African Pike Crow. Like, take those two birds out of it. These birds are incredibly smart and incredibly intelligent. And, I mean, we've even learned that, like, brain size doesn't always mean that an animal is less intelligent. They're just doing things in their own way, right? And so I really like to learn about the animals that I'm caring for and learn those, like, really unique things. I think one of my favorite things I actually learned from my fellow IAATE Enrichment Committee member, Andrea, about our crested caracara Elvis. So crested caracaras they primarily hunt on the ground. They're not as much of an aerial predator as like what a bald eagle may be. And so she showed me this really cool enrichment that she did, where she took newspaper and kind of almost turned it into like a little, like, pocket, or like a little tiny bowl. And then she made a bunch of those out of newspaper. And I think she also used some egg cartons as well, like the little bowls in the egg cartons. And then she took those and she put food in them. And then she went and partially buried them throughout his aviary. And I absolutely adored that enrichment, because it really had in mind the focus of his natural history. And Elvis does have some flight, not flight capabilities, but like he's lacking some flight capabilities there. But he still can fly. However, it's really highlighting that natural history of his, of crested caracaras hunting on the ground and foraging for food on the ground. And I adored that. So that's the kind of stuff where I really live in enrichment, like, where if there's a way that I can, like a unique way that I can enrich our birds, that's not, just giving them a cardboard box to rip apart, or, things like that. That's where I really love enrichment, because it's unique to the individual and it provides an experience for them that they may not get to express all the time, and I just think it's really fun.
So providing enrichment for our birds is actually providing enrichment for our staff.
Exactly. It really is. I think it's really cool to see, like, also like how our staff thinks differently about enrichment. Just because I'm sitting here talking to you guys about enrichment, and we're talking about like the main points that most people share about enrichment, every staff member thinks of enrichment differently. And I think that's also the beautiful thing about it, is it's not always linear. The idea of enrichment's not linear. There's so many different little eddies that can form off of enrichment and like create opportunities that are very unique and aren't always the same thing, which I think is really cool.
So the Ellis example is also a great example of a goals-based enrichment, and
Exactly.
have a specific goal for crested caracara natural history. So let's circle back to goals-based enrichment and talk a little bit about that, since I know that's been a huge focus of yours on the enrichment committee and in the articles that you've been publishing in the flyer.
For sure. Yeah. So goal-based enrichment is basically providing an enriching opportunity with a specific goal in mind. And once again, that's going to be based off of individual history and natural history. But it can be a variety of things. It could be like your goal-based enrichment could be trying to increase a specific behavior from a bird, or it could even be to decrease a specific behavior from a bird, or it could be to try to elicit certain things, or like utilizing a certain part of their room that maybe the bird might be a little bit timid about, or especially if they've just moved to a new room.
Or a black vulture.
or
neophobic species.
Exactly. So there's a variety of ways that we can think about goal-based enrichment. And so the one example that I've used is Sylvia. Once again, coming back to Sylvia, we actually observed Sylvia ripping and shredding the turf in her room.
Mm-hmm.
And so from that observation, one thing that I took from that is, okay, she needs more enrichment that is focused in ripping and shredding, because she's either getting bored and her environment is not stimulating enough for her to be able to feel like she's not stimulated enough to be able to distract her from ripping and shredding, or she's just really enjoying ripping and shredding, and so she wants to rip and shred anything that she can. So the way that we can do that is by providing enrichment, an enriching opportunity for her that can satisfy making her environment less boring, right? While also satisfying her feeling of wanting to rip or shred something apart. And so we can do that in a variety of ways as well. So we can provide them with paper balls, for example, that they can really latch onto and they can rip it apart. Cardboard boxes are a great way of doing this as well. So giving her an opportunity to rip and shred something that is not her turf allows us to be able to make that observation. And we can also look and see, like, all right, like, is she still ripping and shredding her turf when we're giving her this enrichment? And if so, we continue to make changes and we continue to develop these goal-based enrichment opportunities to reduce the amount of ripping and shredding of her turf, but to increase more positive behaviors that we want to see from her, and to increase the likelihood that she's going to either interact with the enrichment that we give her, or she's going to find other ways to express these behaviors. So that's the big thing with goal-based enrichment and of course I use this behavior of trying to reduce the likelihood of a behavior from happening, but at the same time, you can do this to increase a behavior. If we want to see, like right now, for example, it's really hot outside. It's really muggy and gross, right? So maybe we want to see our birds interact with their water dishes a little bit more, making sure that they're staying hydrated, they're staying cool. So we can provide potential enriching opportunities for them that involve their water tubs to increase that behavior of them getting into the water, maybe taking a bath, maybe drinking some water at the same time. That could be through a variety of things.
I'm so glad you brought up the examples of Sylvia and the water dishes, because that encompasses not just our enrichment philosophy, but also our training philosophy. So rather than trying to stop undesirable behaviors, we instead focus on communicating and increasing desirable behaviors to our birds, both through use of enrichment and also through our use of reinforcers. The example that was comparable that came to mind goes back to home with dogs and how they might express a similar destructive behavior if they're not getting enough enrichment, or maybe they just really enjoy the experience of shredding something. And a lot of people reach for, like, the squirt bottle, the rolled up newspaper, and other aversives, but oftentimes it's so much more powerful and so much more psychologically healthy for dogs to instead increase what you want to see. So maybe you give them a holy roller stuffed with their favorite treats instead of telling them not to shred your favorite blanket.
Exactly. I think it also kind of, like, because I will say, I think enrichment and training, a lot of times people tend to think about them like apart, but these things are not mutually exclusive. Like they're really kind of intertwined, and I almost think of using goal-based enrichment as the LRS, or like the least reinforcing scenario. So like we're seeing a behavior that like we may not want to see. So what is a way that we can diminish that behavior, but also increasing a behavior that we do want to see? So the least reinforcing scenario says to take a pause and to think about, like, for just a few seconds, to like kind of reset the situation that's going on, and then to offer up something that's a little bit easier for them to be able to interact with, or in a training scenario, an easier behavior that they have mastered that's, can provide them a quick reinforcer for that, and then to come back to that more challenging training that you're doing there, because that builds confidence. And the thing is with enrichment is that you sometimes have to build confidence with enrichment. Just because you provide a bird with a shreddable item that we want to see doesn't mean that they're always going to be confident of their ability to do that, or they're afraid of it. So sometimes it takes a combination of training to get them to interact with an enrichment item. But at the same time, enrichment doesn't always have to be things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So there's 5 categories of enrichment, thousands of ways to be able to enrich your bird or your animal at home if you guys have them. And
What are those 5 categories?
so that's a great question. So let's see if I can remember them off the top of my head, because so you have social, you have cognitive, you have sensory, food or food presentation are kind of one of the same. And then, what's environmental? That's the last one.
You got it.
So I was like, oh gosh, am I going to forget those 5? So of those 5 main categories of enrichment, like I said, there are thousands of different ways that you can enrich your birds. So it doesn't always have to be a toy. So for example, like if we're talking about Sylvia and those destructive tendencies, I said that we can always provide her with an opportunity to be able to rip and shred something apart. However, what happens if we observe after we provide those new opportunities, because Sylvia is a bird that we know does interact with enrichment that we provide her with. So what happens if we observe, okay, we're giving her these shreddable items, but she's still ripping and shredding the turf? So that might tell us that either there's something specific there going on with that perch that she just really likes a lot, or it could mean that we're not satisfying that need yet. And so, okay, we've provided her with an experience that's tactile. So that's a sensory experience. That's not working for us. So maybe we can provide her with something that's more cognitive, right? That's really going to produce that brain power that we're looking to have there. Could that be puzzle feeders in some way? And keep in mind, these 5 categories of enrichment, one enrichment item can literally encompass multiple different categories. So it doesn't have to be like I'm providing one sensory item. That one enrichment item could be a cognitive enrichment. It could be a sensory enrichment. It could be a food-based enrichment. There's a variety of different things that you can do there. So while I use that example of a tactile experience, it could mean that, like I said, that we're not satisfying that. So could it be that maybe we want a new perch in her room that can provide her with an experience to be able to see her surroundings a little bit better than maybe what she has? Or maybe we want to provide her with a better cognitive experience. So maybe we can still provide her with that shreddable enrichment item, but maybe we can hide little pockets of food throughout. So it turns more into a foraging opportunity for her rather than just ripping and shredding, and it takes that focus away. So there's a variety of different ways that we can talk about enrichment, and using those 5 categories of enrichment to satisfy our goal base, our goals that we have for our goal-based enrichment, and also encompassing those natural behaviors that we want to see, can really help us be able to identify, like I said, that holistic view of what our enrichment is for our individual birds.
And I love that in covering that you pointed out how all three of those types of enrichment that we've talked about in terms of goals-based, natural history, and individual history are playing a role in adjusting those behaviors too.
Yeah.
Because obviously there's a goal for decreasing a behavior, a goal for figuring out what needs should be fulfilled for the individual, that is Sylvia, and also looking at her natural history as bald eagle and what she might enjoy or what cognitive stimuli she may benefit from to help decrease the destruction of the perching.
Yeah. I will say, I do think it's important for us to remember that sometimes this can be challenging.
Yes.
So if any of you guys at home are dealing with any of these things and you're listening to this podcast to try to help get some answers for something that you're thinking about,
Could be with your animals in the house.
I want you guys to remember that it's not always straightforward whenever we're talking about identifying some of these behaviors that we're seeing and trying to reduce or increase a behavior. And it can be difficult. There have been plenty of times where I have been like wanting to pull my hair out because I'm like, I don't know what is causing this behavior. I'm not sure how to stop this behavior. And luckily for us, we have a group of really talented avian care specialists that I can always lean on to help me in those times where I'm feeling a little bit down because I can't seem to figure out what's going on. But I just encourage people to think about it that way as well, that it's not always the easiest thing to try to manage. And another point that I wanted to add on to that as well was that I also want people to know that novel experiences are also really important for your animals as well, for our birds as well. I messed up.
Us humans too.
But yeah, for us humans too. So these novel experiences, and for those of you that don't know what novel means, it's just a new experience that the bird hasn't experienced yet. Basically, while we're talking about goal-based enrichment and we really focus on natural history and individual history, and those are really important things to focus on. Remembering that birds are also going to experience new things in the wild as well. Those pine cones that Crystal talked about earlier, or those corn husks, those are novel experiences for these birds. And so it's really important to remember that in our enrichment program as well, that not everything has to be so systematic and so structured. Sometimes it can be, throwing something in that they've never seen before. And it's important to remember that we don't want to scare the birds or to freak them out in a way. But providing them with new experiences and new opportunities is also an integral part of making sure that you're providing, a well-rounded enrichment program.
It's a very useful framework and mindset that goes into enrichment that you touched on in multiple ways, because it'd be easy to look at Sylvia destroying her perch as acting out or applying those labels. And it's important to remember with enrichment that we can't step into their brains and figure out exactly what they need from us, exactly what they want, exactly why they're exhibiting a certain behavior. We're limited to what we can observe and what we know about their experiences out in the wild, those novel experiences, that natural history, that individual history as well. Mm-hmm. So I think that I'm so grateful for your answers, because they're not just giving us a stronger sense of how we handle enrichment here in American Eagle Foundation, but also showing our philosophy and how we consider the needs of our individual birds as well.
Creating an entire enrichment program, it's not always super straightforward or simple. We've discussed the importance of making sure that we understand a bird's natural history and individual history, which sometimes can be challenging. One of the things that I've asked our interns to do, for example, before they write an enrichment proposal, is to create an ethogram, which is basically a chart of them identifying behaviors that they see. And of course, with our our birds, they're going to maybe express those behaviors that we talked about earlier that wild birds might not express. So those are, kind of falling back into the individual versus natural history kind of talk there as well. But I do, think it's important to make sure that we're talking about safety of our enrichment. Not all enrichment can be for everybody. So we have to kind of, and this, really goes back into understanding a bird's natural history. So we know that like a specific enrichment opportunity for one of our birds isn't always going to fit another bird. So what we might give a falcon or an eagle, for example, isn't going to be the same thing that we might give to a vulture or a smaller, like one of our micros, like a screech owl. So, for example, we might give out a holy roller to one of our falcons, which is just like a ball that has, it's like a rubber ball that has like different holes throughout that we can like put food in, or maybe other kind of sensory, tactile things that they can pull out. However, we've observed that sometimes our vultures like to rip those apart. And so for the sake of safety reasons, we don't want to give them that opportunity to be able to potentially ingest something. So we might be able to give those opportunities as what we call a supervised enrichment, to where an avian care specialist is in the room with them while they're getting that enrichment. And we can make sure that we're removing that enrichment if it becomes damaged. However, there are other kinds of enrichment that we can identify that are unsupervised, that is safe for the bird to have by themselves. So I think it's just really important that we think about safety when we're talking about enrichment, making sure that we understand the bird's specific things that they're like maybe more likely to tear up, for example, or destroy. So we don't want to give a bald eagle who has incredibly powerful feet something that might be a little bit more fragile and can be ripped apart easily, especially if we fear that there could be potential ingestion or things like that. So I just, it can be challenging to think about, and you also have to remember that even with a supervised enrichment, that sometimes getting that enrichment away from an animal can be challenging, especially with raptors. When they lock onto something, they don't tend to let it go very easily. So it's important that whenever we're brainstorming these enrichment ideas that we have for our birds, that we go thoroughly through our safety concerns. And sometimes that means that our enrichment gets denied and we don't get to provide that specific kind of enrichment. However, that doesn't mean that we can't go back to the drawing board and think of new ideas, or maybe think of a safer way to implement that idea that we had, and maybe find a different way to make it a little bit safer. So just something that I kind of wanted to highlight there about safety, just because it is a very important thing, and it's something that I don't want to just glaze over, because
Yes.
it can be potentially life-threatening if we don't think about it and think through the way that we're providing it.
Not just for you, but for the bird and for the
Exactly.
that Avian Care Specialist.
So enrichment can be challenging, and it's always important to keep in mind the safety of the animals when we're developing an enrichment plan. But I want to end on a more optimistic note about enrichment, which is the fact that it is a lifelong learning opportunity. Because of the importance of those novel experiences, we can't afford to become complacent with our enrichment plans, just like we can't afford to be complacent as trainers. We're always striving to provide those new enrichment opportunities that fall into those 5 categories that focus on natural history or individual history or goals as well. And we're continuing to grow and learn as we go. I appreciate your time so much
you.
on this podcast episode, John. You have given me a lot to think about, and hopefully our listeners feel just as enriched by your presence
I hope
as
so.
I do.
I have to stay awake for this one.
Oh, my goodness, Ryan.
So should we go into our favorite bird fact?
I think it's time.
Okay. Do you want to start off?
Maybe I'll let you guys start off.
Okay. So I can go ahead and take mine.
Take the lead, Crystal.
Okay, so you were talking about Elvis and how he's a ground hunter. So obviously he's probably going after insects and rodents and things like that. There's another bird that we have here that does the same thing.
Yes.
And that is the Swainson's hawk.
Okay.
Sometimes called
Oh, I don't know
the
that.
grasshopper hawk.
Oh yeah, because they eat insects.
Mhm.
And they're also one of the longest migrating birds.
They are, which I found to be fantastic whenever I heard that.
Yeah.
I was not aware of that whenever I first heard.
Yeah. So if you like Swainson's hawks, or if you like hawks or birds of prey, just a quick reminder: we are now open to the public.
Hey.
Yeah. So
Come see
come
our
see,
Swainsons.
yeah, come see Pandora. You can find out more information about visiting us and taking a tour at eagles.org/visit.
So I'm also going back to the crested caracara for my fact because they are such weird birds.
It's a
Which
nice
makes
way of putting
me
it.
love them. I always love the weirdos of the bird world. So crested caracaras, speaking of weirdos, they're a tropical species of falcon. They exist in the southwestern U.S. through Central and South America, and they spend a lot of their time on the ground as scavengers, which means that they often share a place with black vultures within their range when scavenging a freshly deceased corpse. Crested caracaras tend to be the more dominant of the two species at the corpse, so black vultures try to befriend them by preening them. They will preen pests and, molting feathers off of crested caracaras to build their good graces so that they can die shoulder to shoulder, wing to wing at corpses.
I love that.
That's really
Black vultures also get on really well with capybaras, so I had to throw capybaras get along with everyone in the natural world. They're the
Yeah.
coolest animals. I'm obsessed with them.
Okay, so I think my bird fact, I'm going to stay within the North America range. So crested caracaras can be found in North America as well. But I've really fallen in love with native species, so I really like talking about native species. So I like to talk about the red-shouldered hawk,
Yes.
for example. So one of the really cool facts about them is they have an unusual courtship behavior that they do, where the two birds will fly together, and then they can be seen rolling over onto their back mid-flight and flying upside down for just a few moments at a time. But it's a really cool courtship behavior that you can see potentially happening. Also, just kind of like red-shouldered hawks, because they tend to be a little bit more cryptic than other hawk species. So
loud there.
they are so loud for sure.
And, when I'm on my tours with people here, I always go and talk about goose, and I'm like, normally you hear them before you see them,
Mhm.
but goose is always like so quiet,
Yeah.
so he makes me look like a liar.
Goose, our resident red-shouldered hawk, is one of my favorite birds that we have here. And sometimes, if you're lucky, if you come on a tour, we actually can hear him communicating with some red-shouldered hawks in the forest behind our aviaries. So it's a really cool opportunity. I actually got to see a red-shouldered hawk flying above this spring. So maybe they were trying to court each other. I don't know. But it was... but yeah, so if you ever see a red-shouldered hawk flying upside down with another red-shouldered hawk, they are courting each other.
They're nerdy.
Yeah.
Putting that
So-
on.
Aerial acrobat.
So yeah.
So I love the fact that you brought up red-shouldered hawks and the fact that it is something that you could kind of catch during your visits to American Eagle Foundation. In fact, there's so much here to see that you'll have to come back more than once. Our memberships are now live. So you can buy a family of 4 membership for just $150. They're on sale currently for a limited time, and they're actually good through December 31st of 2025. So it's a big deal, if you ask me, and a great deal at that. Another thing we forgot to mention that's exciting and upcoming for American Eagle Foundation with regards to IAATE
Oh yeah.
is that we're hosting next year's conference. So if you're interested in dipping your big toe in the IAATE community, and I sure recommend that you do, you can come to the conference next year and see our new facility and also connect with an amazing community of avian trainers and educators. So with that, I think we're good to close out this amazing episode of Raptor Radio. Thank you again, John.
Thank you guys for having me.
Of course, that's it.
Wonderful.
Has been. I hope you'll tune in next time. If you don't already know, we are available wherever you listen to or watch podcasts, be that YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, and Apple, and also Google, I believe now too. So tune in, and you can also help us out by rating and reviewing our podcast so that we can get in the ears of more people worldwide. Thanks again so much, and we hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.